Thank you, colleagues, for your patience. Allow me to now start our webinar. Again, a special Bulubinaka, and welcome to our speakers and presenters this afternoon. A special welcome also to our 20-odd participants who have already joined the webinar. We have a few more that will be joining us shortly. As you can see on the screen, we have a 90-minute period to present to you the NbS for UNFCCC negotiators. And this afternoon, we are glad to have Sandeep from headquarters to lead us on a 20-minute presentation on NbS, what it is, the definition, and its role in the upcoming UNFCCC. We will then have a lineup of speakers to undertake a presentation on either policy uptake in the region or in their country, and a project uptake of NbS in their respective space. At around 6:30 or so, we will have a Q&A, which will be led by Ken Kasem, our regional program coordinator for IUCN Oceania in the region. We are connecting to you from Suva, and again, a Bulubinaka. With that, and just a slight amendment to our program, Ms. Sandeep Singh will now be replaced by Ms. Senivata Wangarai-Masi from the Department of Environment. Unfortunately, Ms. Singh could not make it with us this afternoon. So with that, colleagues, if there's no further questions, allow me to very briefly introduce Dr. Sandeep. Sandeep is currently the Global Coordinator for Climate Change at IUCN and is based in Switzerland. He has worked over 15 years on a wide range of environment, development, and natural resource management issues, both within and outside the government of India and in international organizations abroad. He holds a doctorate in international relations from the University of Oxford, where his research focused on global politics of climate change, and a master's degree from the London School of Economics. Sandeep, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mason. Bulavanaka to everyone. And let me begin, Mason, by first thanking you and Ken and other colleagues in the SUA office for having organized today's webinar. Let me maybe just start sharing my screen and see if that's working okay. Can you confirm that you can see my screen in slide mode?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So I wanted to focus my presentation, as Mason mentioned, on taking us through the journey of the policy uptake of nature-based solutions that we have witnessed in various multilateral processes and negotiations in recent years. This is something that has come up in particular in the last few years very prominently. And given that we are now about to go to Sharm el-Sheikh for COP27 and thereafter to Montreal for the CBD COP15, we thought it would be really important and useful to engage with a range of our government and state members across different IUCN regions to share our experiences of this policy uptake, and to see how best we could support our government and non-governmental members in this process going forward. So let me first begin. This is an opening slide which essentially presents the definition of nature-based solutions. So what are nature-based solutions? You can see the definition on the screen. I won't read it loud, but also on the right-hand side of the slide, you will see a few images that in a sense illustrate the different scenarios and the different settings in which nature-based solutions are actually implemented and available. So on the one hand, you have nature-based solutions that are provided by intact ecosystems. You have nature-based solutions coming from mangrove and coastal forests. You have nature-based solutions in urban settings, in agroforestry systems, in peatland systems, and in grasslands. And this particular definition that you see on the screen, this was the definition that was adopted by IUCN's 1,400 plus members from across our state, government agency, NGO, and Indigenous Peoples Organizations membership at the 2016 World Conservation Congress in Hawaii. But of course, the term nature-based solutions itself has a much longer history. It was, in fact, first used by the World Bank and IUCN way back in 2008, 2009. But as I said, in recent years, there has been a tremendous uptake of this concept, including in the academic literature, and therefore you have nature-based solutions now cited in over 2,000 peer-reviewed articles in recent years, including in the NbS and IPCC joint report in 2021, and also in the IPCC reports that have come since this year. So in this slide, I wanted to, in a sense, take us through some of the key milestones since the adoption of the IUCN definition at our members' assembly in 2016. There are several things that have happened, but maybe I'll just call out a couple that in a sense highlight the extent to which nature-based solutions have actually been mainstreamed in the policy arena. The first would be the Climate Action Summit that was convened by the UN Secretary General in September 2019 in New York, which for the first time had a dedicated track for nature-based solutions, which was co-chaired by China and New Zealand, and which resulted in a nature-based solutions for climate manifesto. In 2020, of course, in IUCN itself, we launched the global standard for nature-based solutions, which was endorsed by our council and subsequently by our wider membership at the IUCN Congress in Marseille last year. And last year was also quite remarkable in the sense that nature-based solutions came up very prominently in the discussions at COP26 in Glasgow. And I'll get to that a bit later, but already maybe worthwhile highlighting is that even the cover decision, the Glasgow Climate Pact that came out of COP26, very strongly recognized the nature-climate link, the biodiversity-climate link, and the critical role that nature and ecosystems could play in delivering benefits for both climate change mitigation and adaptation. And there were a spate of announcements, including from Canada, which announced that it would allocate 1/5 of its total climate financing, approximately $1 billion, towards nature-based solutions. And the culminating moment, if you will, of the mainstreaming of nature-based solutions could be seen this year in February 22 at the United Nations Environmental Assembly in Nairobi, where the UN member states adopted a resolution on nature-based solutions, where they agreed on a multilaterally agreed definition for nature-based solutions, and which now really provides the foundation for nature-based solutions to be explicitly referenced in a variety of international agreements and processes. So how does the UNIA definition relate to the IUCN definition, and how different or similar are they? So in this slide, I've just put the two definitions side by side, and what will become hopefully very quickly apparent to you is that the UNIA definition is very similar to the IUCN definition. In fact, it directly builds on the IUCN definition, and it differs only to the extent that it adds a few additional qualifications in a few places to flesh out some of the elements in a little more detail. So just to give one example, whereas the IUCN definition calls for restoring, protecting, sustainably managing and restoring natural and modified ecosystems, in the UNIA definition they unpack the natural and modified ecosystems to explain that these cover terrestrial, freshwater, coastal, and marine ecosystems. And likewise, while the IUCN definition refers to nature-based solutions to addressing societal challenges, the UNIA definition unpacks these societal challenges as being in social, economic, and environmental in character. But in essence, the two definitions are exactly the same. And this is something that we work very closely with our colleagues in UNEP to try and have as close alignment as possible between the two definitions, because the last thing that the international community would have wanted were two definitions that were entirely far apart. From the IUCN point of view, very often a question is also asked: how do nature-based solutions relate to the ecosystem approach of the CBD? And here, worthwhile recalling again is the fact that IUCN was very closely involved in the development of the ecosystem approach of the CBD back in the day itself. And in our view, nature-based solutions, which is again centered on ecosystems, offers a robust operational framework for consistently applying the concept of the ecosystem approach in practice. So we don't see the two things as being completely different. We see the concept of nature-based solutions, again, building directly on top of the ecosystem approach itself. If we look at the role of nature-based solutions in addressing societal challenges, we understand that the societal challenges may relate to a wide range of challenges, from climate change to food and water insecurity, to poverty reduction, to health, and so on. But in the next couple of slides, I wanted to focus more specifically on the benefits that we see of investing in nature-based solutions to address the specific challenge of climate change. And in this slide, I present some of the latest scientific findings, and this is from a study that was published in Nature last year, that in a sense tried to document the mitigation benefits of investing in nature-based solutions. And the study estimated that investing in nature-based solutions through the protection of intact ecosystems, through the sustainable management of working lands, and through restoration efforts could save up around 10 gigatons of CO2 equivalent per year. And that's equivalent in a sense to the entire global transportation emissions of the world. And if we translate that into, okay, what impact does that have in terms of meeting the 1.5 or the 2-degree goal of the Paris Agreement? And here again, the paper highlighted the fact that if nature-based solutions were designed to be ambitious and also bearing in mind the need for longevity, then they could play quite a significant role in helping to meet the 2-degree and the 1.5-degree temperature goals of the Paris Agreement. And so in the shaded areas in this graph on the right, you see, in a sense, the bending of the curve that can be delivered through investing in nature-based solutions. Therefore, nature-based solutions, in our view, are absolutely critical for achieving the net zero goal by 2050 that the world needs to see. But of course, we are very, very conscious of the fact that nature-based solutions cannot deliver this on their own. And indeed, nature-based solutions cannot be a substitute for serious emission reductions that are now needed in all sectors of the global economy. Therefore, to achieve net zero by 2050 requires ambitious emission reductions across all sectors. And in addition, it also requires the world to invest in nature-based solutions through the protection, management, and conservation of restoration of the world's ecosystems. And this is a study that that IUCN published together with UNEP last year, and this was launched at Glasgow, and where we reviewed the existing literature on the topic. And what we found was that even taking into account all the uncertainties as well as the time needed to apply the adequate safeguards, our estimate was that nature-based solutions could save at least 5 gigatons of CO2 equivalent per year by 2030, and at least 10 gigatons of CO2 equivalent per year by 2050. We are also at pains always to emphasize that nature-based solutions to climate change even when it relates to climate change, should not be seen in terms of mitigation alone or be viewed in carbon-centric terms alone, because as we know, nature-based solutions can play a very important role in building resilience against climate change and in reducing disaster risks. And perhaps the most visible example of this is the role that is played by mangrove ecosystems around the world, which are estimated to provide over $65 billion in flood protection services and safeguard 15 million people against flooding each year. We also see increasingly countries and subnational governments and cities and municipalities also invest in nature-based solutions in an urban context, where they have been found to reduce stormwater runoff, for instance, or reduce the heat island effects that's often witnessed in cities. Now, in terms of the best practice guidance that is available for NbS implementation on the ground, there are two different elements that IUCN focuses on. First, at the level of principles, we say that nature-based solutions, and this is particularly in a climate change context, that if you want to design nature-based solutions to address the climate challenge, then there are 4 caveats that need to be kept in mind first of all. So the first caveat is, as I said before, this can't be a substitute for emission reductions. It has to be on top of cutting emissions in other sectors. Secondly, it has to be built on conserving and protecting existing ecosystems. Thirdly, it has to be socially responsible. And what that means is that it needs to take into account the needs, the priorities, the concerns, and the rights of the most vulnerable, particularly local communities and indigenous peoples. And finally, it needs to be ecologically responsible. So one cannot have a situation in which a grassland is converted into a monoculture plantation for the purposes of carbon farming, and that is called nature-based solutions. So these are 4 sort of caveats that need to be kept in mind upfront when we talk about implementing nature-based solutions. But drilling down one layer deeper, as mentioned earlier, in 2020, IUCN also launched the global standard for nature-based solutions to help policymakers, practitioners, investors, and the wider community in general to, in a sense, adjudicate between what is and what isn't nature-based solutions. And we provided additional guidance for the application of the standard itself. And the standard has 8 specific criteria and 28 associated indicators. And the application of the NbS standard on the ground through assessing performance against these criteria and indicators can help, in a sense, to provide the degree of quality assurance that is needed to determine that what is claimed as NbS is really NbS according to what the standard says. Going back to the issue of policy uptake, as mentioned earlier, we have seen a growing policy uptake and recognition of nature-based solutions in recent years. I've already mentioned the UN Climate Action Summit of 2019, but we also have seen an explicit recognition of nature-based solutions. For example, in the ministerial communiques that came out of both the G7 and the G20 summits last year, which were chaired respectively by the UK and Italy. I already mentioned the prominence that nature-based solutions had at COP26 in Glasgow last year. So, for example, nature and nature-based solutions was one of the thematic priorities of the UK presidency. Indeed, it was referenced in the statements that were made in the high-level segment, both by heads of state and government and by ministers. There were a range of initiatives and announcements that were launched on nature-based solutions, including one that I would call out was a joint nature statement of all the multilateral development banks, including the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the African Development Bank, and so on, that called for making greater investments in nature-based solutions. At the national level, nature-based solutions have also been increasingly incorporated by governments in their nationally determined contributions in support of the Paris Agreement. Here, for example, I've shown the NDC, the updated NDC of Chile, which not only explicitly included nature-based solutions in their NDCs and spelled out different elements of it, but also very directly referenced the IUCN definition. And as I mentioned earlier, NbS was also very clearly recognized in the NbS and IPCC joint report on biodiversity and climate change that was released last year. Again, in 2019, IUCN, together with Oxford University, undertook an analysis of the extent to which Paris Agreement parties had incorporated nature-based solutions within their NDCs. And what we found in that analysis was that around 66% of Paris Agreement signatories had included nature-based solutions in one form or the other. But what that analysis also showed us was that in most of the cases, they were very general references and they were not really quantified in terms of determining real targets or commitments. And so one of the recommendations that we made was that was to countries to incorporate more concrete and quantified commitments on nature-based solutions in their updated NDCs going forward. On the right-hand side of this slide, this is drawn from the UNEP IUCN report last year, which did an updated analysis, and this showed the categorization of the incorporation of different ecosystem types within the NDCs as classified by different continents. So just to give you a sense of which countries across which continents have incorporated nature-based solutions across different ecosystems in their NDCs. Some notable developments following the UNIA resolution from February this year. In May 2022, the UNCCC, so the UN Convention on Combating Desertification, also included a clear reference to nature-based solutions in one of their COP decisions that was held in Abidjan. In July 2022, the UN member states in the Ministerial Declaration of the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, so that's the highest body of the UN that is tracking progress on the SDGs. So the Ministerial Declaration again explicitly recognized the importance of nature-based solutions as defined in the UNIA resolution. So this is my last slide. So from our perspective, looking ahead both to UNFCCC COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh and CBD COP15 in Montreal, what we feel would be really helpful would be if there was a clear and explicit reference to nature-based solutions in both the UNFCCC and the CBD COP decision text. And of course, in the case of the CBD, the parties there are negotiating the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, and there may be targets and places within the framework itself where the right references to nature-based solutions can be really helpful. And the reason why we argue that this having such a clear and explicit reference would be helpful are the following. So firstly, it would help to build on and operationalize the current more general references to the role of nature and ecosystems that is there in the Glasgow Climate Pact. So here, I've just pasted the language from Decision 1 CP26, the Glasgow Climate Pact that was adopted by parties last year, where again, we were really pleased with the language because on the first hand, this took on board precisely the message that our members had communicated from the IUCN Congress in Marseille. Firstly, that the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis were not two separate crises, but were deeply interlinked. And secondly, again, our members in Marseille highlighted that the nature-based solutions could play a critical role in meeting both these challenges simultaneously. But of course, in the Glasgow Climate Pact decision, the reference that was finally agreed on by parties was this more general reference to nature and ecosystems. And some of you may recall that the first draft of the Glasgow Climate Pact had actually used the language of nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches in this text. But there were some parties, however, that were not comfortable with a reference to nature-based solutions because their argument was that there is no multilaterally agreed definition for NbS yet. And therefore, the compromise language that was finally agreed in the end was the one that you see on the screen. However, since then, of course, as we know, there has been the UNIA resolution that provides this multilateral definition. And so we believe that, having a reference in both the UNFCCC and the CBD COPs, given that a reference is already there in the UNCCD decisions, can ensure policy alignment for joint delivery now across all the 3 Rio conventions. And having this reference can also facilitate stronger implementation of NbS at scale. It can provide greater confidence to the ongoing efforts that are being undertaken by both state and non-state actors on nature-based solutions. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, having it in the decision text will actually enable parties and governments to exercise a greater degree of oversight and accountability on the use and application of NbS. So let me perhaps just stop there. Thank you again very much, and I'll be happy to take any questions and discuss further in the Q&A. Thank you again.
Thank you, Sandeep. I am cognizant of the time that we have. So I'll ask participants if they have any questions to type it in the chat, and we will try and get it answered for them, either during the question and answer or later on when we provide a feedback report to the participants. But thank you for providing that update brief on NbS and for setting the scene. As some of you will be aware, we held a similar update brief for the CBD negotiators from the region last week. They were assembled in Nandi, Fiji, to plan for the CBD COP that's coming up in Montreal. Colleagues, with that overview, I'd like to now introduce our first presenter. Our first presenter, Ms. Claudia Cooney, who is the Assistant Director, Water Security and Nature-Based Solutions Section at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Australia. She sent us 5 pages of CV, but just to let our participants know that she is also a former IUCN staff member, having worked for IUCN's water program in Laos way back in 2008. Claudia, welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mason. Really great to be here, and thanks so much for the introduction and the welcome. It's really acknowledge the excellent work that IUCN is doing to support the global standard and nature-based solutions. I also acknowledge Dr. Ray, who was the conservation director at WWF when I had my first job very, very long time ago, but also just great to be here with everyone. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners. I'm here on Ngunnawal country in Canberra, Australia. I'll try to share my screen. I'm afraid it's not working, Mason. I wonder if you have the slideshow there as well.
Try and share it from this end.
Thank you, that would be great.
Oh, Claudia, she sent it.
That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So if you go to the next slide, if that's okay. Thank you. So yeah, as I mentioned, we're incredibly supportive of nature-based solutions with the Australian government. Very excited to see how it's progressed, especially particularly with the UNIA commitment that Sandeep mentioned, which really has that kind of multilateral framework that we can use to promote it through other forums. It's become quite a focus of engagements through the G7, G20, all the sort of political engagements we've been involved in this year, which is great to see. I guess we in Australia are very focused on supporting partnerships. We recognise we're not the experts. We've got a lot to learn from the REDD+ world. Blue carbon's emerging, so we're trying to bring together scientist countries like Fiji and all the sort of other expertise that we have from IECN, WWF and our partners to share advice. So we set up the International Partnership for Blue Carbon. We have similar groupings in the region within the IRA Blue Carbon Hub. We work with the French on the Kiwa initiative, as I've mentioned on the screen, and there's quite a number of partnerships really to share expertise and make sure everyone kind of understands the value of nature-based solutions, but also has the opportunity to hear what each other's doing, share advice. I guess we particularly interested in nature-based solutions in Australia before the ability for communities to harness the benefits. You know, we've always recognised that protection of biodiversity is incredibly important, but nature-based solutions really brings in the social kind of benefits where communities can have sustainable livelihoods, potentially access carbon markets, streams, and new financial kind of incentives to protect nature, and as well as the carbon mitigation and adaptation opportunities it presents. So it really supports all of the outcomes we're looking to achieve through climate in a more holistic way, recognising, of course, mitigation through energy transition is absolutely essential to complementing this work. Next slide, if that's okay, Mason. So I guess not just the Paris Agreement, it's worth reflecting nature-based solutions. It's incredibly important through all of the multilateral environmental agreements, such as the World Heritage Convention, Ramsar Convention on Wetlands of International Importance, and CBD. Australia, we were very keen to make sure that in nature-based solutions was reflected through Ramsar. In 2018, we put forward a resolution about integrating coastal wetlands in throughout the NDCs and recognising their value. We've worked with other partners like Egypt who did the same for the Convention on Biological Diversity. So I think it's worth sort of reminding us the kind of holistic nature of nature-based solutions when we're talking about Paris and the interlinkages between all of the agreements. The International Partnership for Blue Carbon, I should say, has some documents, if anyone's interested, which goes through this in more detail on the website. So it goes through all the kind of passages where NbS is reflected in some of these agreements. So Australia recently hosted the Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference for Disaster Risk Reduction in Brisbane, and that was a really good chance for us to have conversations about how the Sendai framework links with nature-based solutions in terms of supporting disaster resilience and mitigating issues like storm surges and erosion. And we also recently hosted the UNFCCC Standing Committee of Finance for Nature-Based Solutions Forum in Cairns, which again was a chance for our partners to come together. It was great to see partners from Fiji and some of the Pacific countries, Samoa, New Zealand were there, and just talking with the multilateral development banks, NGOs, about how do we catalyse investment into nature-based solutions. And I know that the Secretariat for UNFCCC have brought together a lot of, the Standing Committee on Finance have brought together a lot of the outcomes from that forum, which will go directly into the discussions at COP27. So again, there's a high-level statement on that on their website, but very happy to share it with participants. Next slide. Thanks, Mason. So here's the kind of, as I mentioned, we've got referenced to it in the UNFCCC already. The other kind of way Australia's been working with Fiji and others to try to make sure that blue carbon, which is our kind of up-and-coming star in the nature-based solutions world, is reflected. We've developed this coastal blue carbon ecosystems. So that's the report, but we've been working on kind of expertise to support how that's done in practice. So that's the supplement to the IPCC guidelines for national greenhouse inventories, or the wetland supplement. So that's available for people to download. And basically it talks about how the kind of accounting can be done and how countries can think about that. I guess this is incredibly important because when we do projects with NGOs, we want to make sure countries can understand the benefits of retaining accounts for their own NDCs against whether or not they want to sell them on the voluntary market. So that kind of has an equity issue for us. So really keen to use the expertise of Fiji and other countries to share that with those in the region to kind of understand the nuances around the pros and cons of keeping the carbon metrics within their own kind of accounting system. Next slide, thanks, Mason. So here's the report, and again, yeah, so that can all be downloaded from the website International Partnership for Blue Carbon. The other thing we're very keen on is developing kind of environmental accounting frameworks to support this. So that was one of Australia's commitments under the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy. Again, working with Fiji, so that sort of aligns with our commitments to support the integrity of environmental accounting. Next slide, thank you. So when we talk about integrity, we wanted to I think nature-based solutions has received criticism, so we want to make sure that it's not seen as something that is able to be greenwashed, that it's not just kind of locking up biodiversity, so developing countries can't access it, and to show that there's sort of safeguards around double counting. That's particularly, of course, important around the carbon credits work. So I guess that's something we're very conscious of in Australia, and so given we're promoting nature-based solutions so heavily, very keen to make sure that any risks are also managed. So the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, I think, would be incredibly important to ensure that integrity. So it's not just about carbon metrics anymore, it's the biodiversity, which Sandeep mentioned, is very much front and centre. It's not an offset scheme. It's about ensuring biodiversity integrity, community side kind of livelihoods integrity, traditional knowledge and science is another thing we're very keen to ensure that it informs any work that we're doing. We work through in Australia a number of forums to do that, both around the environmental mapping and accounting work, but then also working with the private sector if they're investing in carbon credits, that they've got environmental disclosures. We have the Task Force for Nature-Based Disclosures that we work with, and that's in kind of a conversation where we're going to have a couple of events at COP to further that discussion, which would very much welcome all of you to attend. Next slide, Mason. So here, I guess wanted to end with a few examples of our work, because I think it makes it seem a lot more real than talking about a lot of kind of the text. Climate Resilient by Nature, we're really proud to launch last year at COP26, working with our friends at WWF to kind of create opportunities so we started in the Pacific. It's recently expanded to the Mekong region, and it has a few elements. There's some activities WWF's already doing to support kind of microfinancing opportunities for communities to access funding and to protect the environment. working with, it's very important for us to look at how can we protect environments that are already within existing management zones, so that there's the long-term kind of outcomes for the countries as well, and that those improvements are sustained. And then we had a challenge fund, which was quite interesting. It was a kind of an opportunity to bring together the formerly known as humanitarian NGOs into the space of nature-based solutions. So we're working with ActionAid, Save the Children, quite a number of organisations which traditionally we wouldn't have thought of as doing nature-based solutions work, but that's a really good chance for us to learn their best practice around gender equity, social inclusion, and we're learning from WWF, Live and Learn, and some of the other organisations on the environmental side, and bringing the best out of both organisations. So please go to the website, look that up. It's a really great opportunity. We're working in Samoa, PNG, Fiji, Vanuatu, all over the region. So thank you. Next slide, Mason. The Blue Carbon Accelerator Fund was also launched at COP26. This one, we recognised that one of the challenges of starting up projects was the funding at the early phase. So this is, we partnered with IUCN. They've already got the Blue Natural Capital Facility, so we created a window there for International Partnership for Blue Carbon partners to access support to create, to get projects off the ground, essentially. So that's an international project, and we've just, you can go online and has a bit more information about the recipients of that funding. Thanks, Mason. Next slide. And this, I think the Pacific Blue Carbon Program is an example where Australia is working bilaterally with countries and really working out what do they want, what do they need, and how can we support them. This one we're working directly with Fiji and PNG. We have a couple of others in Sri Lanka and Indonesia and other parts of the region. But this one we're working with Conservation International to essentially map carbon ecosystem landscapes, to look at opportunities, and as I've said here, it's a good chance to build the knowledge for MRV, thinking about how to incorporate these into the NDCs of the country, but also if there's interest, linking it up with the private sector to create carbon credits. So very proud of that project too. Next slide. Reef Cloud, again, looking at the opportunities around mapping, and this one we're using sort of quite new activities with AIMS to look at how we inform the knowledge base, how do we look at where other project sites could be, and how to protect some of the sort of flagship species in the region as well while we're doing that. So coral, while it doesn't mitigate carbon, obviously has wonderful other resilience and adaptation benefits. So looking at other opportunities through nature-based solutions as well. Again, working with traditional knowledge, science, bringing out the best so we can look a bit more holistically at the region to think about, okay, here's some of the activities we're already working on, where do we want to go next? I guess the other challenge for Australia is we have a lot of kind of demonstration projects, so we're very eager to look at how do we work with partners to have a bit more of a holistic landscape on activities, where we're learning from each other. Climate Resilient by Nature, which I mentioned, is going to have a knowledge hub so that we can share those learnings. We're also working very closely with MFAT, with the PIPIN project IUCN is obviously working on too, to complement some of the work they're doing as opposed to duplicating. That's sort of something we're conscious of as well. Next slide. That's it. I've put my email address there. I might not be able to answer all of your questions. I'm certainly not an expert, but very happy to follow up separately if there's anything I can provide, or talk to you about Australia's work more. Thanks very much, Mason. That's the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Claudia. Unfortunately, Mason had to be called out. So I'm Ken Kassam. I'm the regional program coordinator. Thank you very much, Claudia. That was really interesting and great to see Australia's leadership, especially on blue carbon and all of your work around the region in Asia and the Pacific.
Thanks, Mason. Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, it's confusing with my name at the bottom there. We'll take questions, hopefully, if we've got time at the end. So our next speaker is Dr. Ray Nias. Ray comes to us with a wealth of experience from the Asia Pacific region. He was conservation director for WWF Asia, Australia for a long time. He was director of island conservation in the region for many years, and since 2009 has been running Tierra Mar, which is now an NGO with a strong focus on nature-based solutions. Ray's done a lot of work around the Pacific on invasive species and led the Pacific Invasive Species Partnership for many years. He's an experienced fundraiser and communicator, and is a certified environmental practitioner. So Ray, with that brief introduction, can I turn it over to you and just ask you, noting that we're a little bit behind time, please try and keep to your 10 minutes.
Thanks very much, Ken. And can I share my screen, please?
Permission to share your screen?
Thank you. How's that?
If you can just put it into presenter mode.
Oh, yes, all right. Oh, I can't see that. Where am I?
Looks great.
How's that? Good, thanks.
Perfect.
I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country I'm speaking to you from. I'm not from the speaking from the country of the Ghana people. First, very quickly, a little background about us, because we're a small NGO. We're not necessarily well known. We're a small NGO active in Oceania for more than 20 years. We're a member of IUCN and the Pacific Island Roundtable for Nature Conservation, otherwise known as PERT. We believe that nature-based solutions is a powerful approach to addressing social challenges such as climate change, biodiversity loss. And this is especially, the concept is especially relevant in the Pacific in our view. And we've been helping regional and national conservation organisations and research bodies to better understand NbS and help them design NbS projects now for around 2 years. What I'd like to talk to you about is some aspects of Australia's national policy on NbS, how it talks about NbS, as a research program relevant to nature-based solutions, and an example that brings that together, I think, rather well, I hope. So from the Department of Environment, I took this phrase straight off the website there. The website's there for your interest. But national policy for NbS refers to as nature-based solutions for climate. And it goes on to say that ecosystems across Australia and our region reduce emissions by sequestering carbon, allowing to adapt to climate change and protecting communities from floods and storm surges. And nature-based solutions are actions that protect, manage, or restore these ecosystems in ways that provide benefits to communities and ecosystems at the same time. And that, of course, I think people recognise is one of the most defining factors of what is an NbS, and that it equally balances benefits to communities and ecosystems at the same time. Further on the national policy context, again taken from the website, it further talks about the need for protection, restoration, and management of ecosystems, and gives a few examples there. And the policy is implemented by providing investment into a number of programs. And at the federal Commonwealth level. And these include programs that protect biodiversity and threatened species, those that contribute to climate mitigation through carbon sequestration, programs that make communities more resilient to climate change, programs that contribute to food security, and those that support businesses reliant on healthy ecosystems, such as fishing, tourism, and agriculture. So you can see that the Australian embrace of nature-based solutions in this context is really quite all-embracing. And then to research, Australia has at the federal level a thing called the National Environmental Science Program, or NESP. And one of these programs is being implemented by a group called the Sustainable Communities and Waste Hub. The SCORE Hub is a consortium comprising 5 of our research institutions, various universities, the CSIRO, for example, as well as providing collaboration for a range of actors, academics, governments, industry, and the community, with a shared objective of enhancing sustainable community outcomes and reducing negative waste impacts. This program refers very explicitly to nature-based solutions as one aspect of this work, and so puts it in the context of sustainable communities and the management of waste. This is the specific program that refers to nature-based solutions. It's program IP 102, Sustainable People Environment Interactions, and that's led by the Monash University of Tasmania. And this is a direct quote where they say they use the lens of nature-based solutions as an approach, recognising that it's widely adopted in global policy and standards and refers to the IUCN, but also acknowledges that it's less commonly known and applied in Australia. The research emphasises that they intend to foster multiple benefits for people and places, promote the resilience of socio-ecological systems to environmental change. One of the short-term outcomes for this research includes defining what as a national approach to NbS in Australia, including a summary report or a fact sheet on nature-based solutions by March next year. This is a program that TRMR has been assisting in the development of. I want to talk to you about a specific project, which I think really illustrates well how Australia is putting into practice at the on-ground level the concept of nature-based solutions. In this case, I'm talking about a project being undertaken within the Adelaide International Bird Sanctuary involving blue carbon. The Adelaide International Bird Sanctuary is a site where migratory birds from Siberia fly to southern hemisphere and spend the summer here in our coastal ecosystems, just north of where I'm sitting now. Blue carbon, as a reminder, of course, is the storage of carbon by coastal ecosystems and vegetation, such as seagrasses, samphire, and mangroves, which all occur in the Adelaide International Bird Sanctuary. The sanctuary has received funding from the federal government's Blue Carbon Ecosystem Grants Fund. This is a fund designed to demonstrate and trial blue carbon approaches in the expectation that Australia will develop a blue carbon credit system. The project involves coastal restoration over 12,500 hectares of the sanctuary, involving Crown land and adjoining private properties. It's a $3 million grant. It also has substantial additional private and corporate funding, has been developed and is being implemented by the Nature Conservancy and its partners. Basically, what they're trying to do is to reconnect coastal tidal wetlands that have been disconnected from the ocean for agricultural purposes over many years. And with the permission of the landholders and other managers of these areas, they're going to be linked back into the coastal ecosystems and reconnected to tidal flow. This should improve the habitat, result in restoration of vegetation and substantial sequestration of blue carbon. This is what in the jargon is called a hybrid approach. to nature-based solutions, which involves both engineering, in other words, the construction or deconstruction of levees and banks, and also nature, in other words, the natural regeneration or assisted regeneration of plants and vegetation types within those wetland ecosystems. There are various partners, including government, state, local government, universities, the Ghana people, Bird South Australia, BirdLife Australia, and the landscape boards. Just out of interest, I'm sitting in that red dot called Adelaide, and the project is just north of there in South Australia. So some of the outcomes from the project include include the need to improve the health and extent of mangroves and salt marsh, which will result in blue carbon capture, helping to combat climate change, protect coastlines, and assist tidal retreat, improve the feeding and roosting habitat for migratory shorebirds and resident shorebirds, and expand nursery areas for local fish stocks. The project will enhance and accelerate habitat restoration through landscape scale restoration, including the active management of 3,000 hectares, as I say, through this hybrid approach of using nature and engineering. The project will improve some of the local livelihoods for alternative income streams for farmers, and will create opportunities for tourism and recreational activities. This is quite an important site for tourism in South Australia and attracts people from all over the world to see the visiting shorebirds. The project will also improve community understanding of the value of mangroves, salt marsh and seagrasses for coastal protection and broader ecosystem services. So thanks very much. As I say, I just wanted to show you how Australia is approaching the policy of NbS, how it's looking at the research questions and explicitly addressing some of the research questions around NbS, and how that is leading to on-ground demonstration projects such as the Adelaide International Bird Sanctuary project. So thank you very much. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Ray. Really interesting to see the on-the-ground examples and the work that's being done, especially there in South Australia. And hope I can get to see the shorebirds someday with you around there. Our next speaker is Dr. Kayla Kingdon-Bebb. Dr. Kayla is the Director of Policy at New Zealand's Department of Conservation. She's an experienced public policy leader, manager, and practitioner. In her current role with the policy unit at Department of Conservation, she leads a team of 50 people, more than 50 people working across a range of issues that manage about a third of New Zealand's landmass. She has a particular interest and specialty in treaty law, focusing on the interaction between Indigenous and colonial legal systems in the context of natural resource management. Dr. Kayla, are you there? Do you want to unmute yourself? You are still muted. Oh, there you
Sorry.
go. No worries.
Can you hear me now?
I hear you very clear, and please go ahead.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Ken. Kia ora koutou, he mihi nui, he mihi mahana kia koutou katoa. My name is Kayla, and as introduced, I'm the Director of Policy at the Department of Conservation. I was just reflecting on some of the speakers earlier tonight and noted in Sandeep's presentation the quite remarkable uptake that has been illustrated around nature-based solutions over the past few years. And I guess what we wanted to talk about tonight is that it's been a really exciting past 12 months in New Zealand with respect to policy uptake of nature-based solutions. And of course, that's due in no small part to the efforts of the IUCN and ENGOs more generally. In New Zealand, we recognize that we are facing dual and inextricably linked climate and biodiversity crises. And in response to this, we are integrating nature-based solutions into our policy frameworks now, including most recently our National Emissions Reduction Plan and our National Adaptation Plan. These two significant plans set out our national strategies, policies, and actions to reduce emissions and to build climate resilience. I'm going to outline how we've gone about this policy integration work, and then I'll be handing over to my colleague Martin Rod to present a case study where some of our nature-based solutions are being put into practice. For New Zealand, nature-based solutions offer a practical approach for integrating climate and biodiversity policy across all sectors. As we've heard, they can remove carbon from the atmosphere, store it, and build resilience to the impact of climate change at the same time as supporting biodiversity, communities, and wider environmental outcomes. Because of the multiple benefits that nature-based solutions provide, they offer a great return on investment, and they're good fiscal policy. And our decision to actively prioritize nature-based solutions recognizes that the climate crisis is also a biodiversity crisis, and that wherever possible, we need to design our response to the climate crisis in a way that also protects, enhances, and restores nature. Critically, nature-based solutions can also better recognize Indigenous worldviews and approaches to climate change. This often requires adopting a more holistic view in which our efforts to reduce emissions and to promote climate resilience also support wider outcomes for the natural world and for people at the same time. In New Zealand, expertise from Te Ao Māori will play a vital role in the creation and implementation of nature-based solutions in our unique context. So I think I mentioned most recently, we've had quite a big year with the release of our National Emissions Reduction Plan and Adaptation Plan. But we've also seen the reflection of nature-based solutions across a heap of really significant policy instruments and initiatives. I really want to focus on the two most significant ones today, which is the Emissions Reduction Plan. So our Emissions Reduction Plan in New Zealand is required by our Climate Change Response Act. So it's a statutory plan that contains strategies, policies, and actions for achieving our first emissions budget. It includes actions across every part of government and every sector of the economy, including transport, energy, building and construction, waste, agriculture, and forestry. But most notably, the ERP, as we call it, also dedicates an entire chapter to working with nature. A key commitment in the plan is to ensure that climate policy, planning, and action also protect, enhance, and restore nature, and that any impacts on nature should be mitigated as much as possible. And the key tool utilized to this effect is the prioritization of nature-based solutions. The Emissions Reduction Plan identifies 4 key action points to progress the improved alignment of climate and biodiversity action and policy in New Zealand. These actions are, first, to prioritize nature-based solutions within our planning and regulatory system. This action reflects the importance of creating enabling policy settings to facilitate implementation. The second is for us to report on biodiversity as part of our Emissions Reduction Plan reporting. And this is to ensure that the impact of climate change actions on biodiversity are considered. Thirdly, it commits us to encouraging global efforts to use nature-based solutions. And finally, it also establishes an integrated work program to deliver climate, biodiversity, and wider environmental and socioeconomic outcomes. I'll speak just a little bit on the integrated work program. So New Zealand's going to have multiple iterations of our emissions reduction plan, and this is our first one. And for this first instance, we've identified 4 key areas within the integrated work program to focus on. And the reasons we've picked these 4 areas is that they're live areas of policy development, and they're areas where poor alignment between climate and biodiversity policy presents a lot of risk. And alternatively, they're areas that could provide a lot of upside benefit for policy for biodiversity if we get our policy settings well aligned. The 4 areas are supporting the restoration and protection of Indigenous forests, improving our knowledge about nature-friendly carbon removals, supporting native afforestation and restoration through New Zealand's carbon neutral government program, and also investigating incentives for public and private investment in biodiversity. Reflecting also on the comments earlier tonight, we also recognize that nature-based solutions aren't all about mitigation. They're also really critical in the adaptation space. And New Zealand's National Adaptation Plan was released quite recently in August. The NAP contains government-led strategies, policies, and proposals that will help New Zealanders adapt to the changing climate and its effects, so that we can reduce the potential harm of climate change, as well as seize the opportunities that arise. The National Adaptation Plan responds to the risks identified in our recent climate change risk assessment, and a key action in it is the prioritization of nature-based solutions which focus on protecting and restoring Indigenous ecosystems, and also identifying sites that need buffer against climate risk. There are a number of other significant policies and programs that have been developed over the last few years that really focus on the alignment between climate and biodiversity policy and action, and also emphasize the role in nature-based solutions more generally. But instead of going on at length about these, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Martin to speak to you about a case study where we're implementing nature-based solutions in practice. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thanks, Kayla.
Kayla, very much. Really great to hear how much New Zealand and DOC is doing on climate and nature-based solutions. So I think, Martin, you are up next, if you're ready to go. Martin is the Director of Partnerships at Department of Conservation, has been with DOC for many years, and is now focusing on partnerships to achieve predator-free New Zealand by 2050. So I think with that, Martin, I'll hand it over to you.
Kia ora koutou. Thanks very much, Ken, and thanks, Kayla, for the fantastic leading with the policy scene. What I just want to emphasise here is how we've built a collaboration of Indigenous knowledge, local government knowledge, and central government knowledge to figure out how we can work at a scale that no one entity can pursue by themselves. So cross-boundary, etc. The reason why it's so important to have Indigenous knowledge at this table is because not only are iwi Māori kaitiaki or guardians of the landscape, they hold a holistic view that everything is connected from mountains to the sea. That's how they work. Also landowners and business owners within this context. What I just want to do here is to describe how we work, and we've partnered with the Nature Conservancy to bring in the international expertise, and I'm going to focus on this one project out of many here. So it's referred to as the Tihuiri project. It is in the top of the South Island of New Zealand. And it's approximately 200,000 hectares. The first part is focused largely on freshwater, building climate resilience into the catchment, as well as biodiversity outcomes. So just quickly, if I was to bounce through it, you can see here, this is just a shot of the catchment. It receives quite extensive storm events that are really problematic, and the flow-on effect of that as it flows out into the coastal marine area. So we want to maintain and enhance the ecological integrity of these systems. As well as doing that, we also want to ensure that we've got a really vibrant and resilient primary sector. This is fundamental in terms of how we operate, and we need people to flourish with nature if we are to be successful. We also want people to be able to enjoy the natural environment. So the Indigenous word around this is returning the mauri or the life force to a river, and that's very much what we see and enjoy as a society. So how we've done this is we've undertaken what's referred to as a catchment condition survey. It's about 196 k's of waterways through this catchment, and to date we've surveyed 80% of the farmers within this catchment, and we've tested water quality across 100 sites to really understand what is going on. So a closer look at that. We've looked at stock and stock access to significant areas. We've looked at where potential wetlands are impacted through such land use, and we've looked at where waterways have lost all the shade, culverts, the necessary things to maintain a healthy environment. So with that information, what we've done is we've taken that information, connected with the landowners at place with that Indigenous knowledge, and we've come up with some initial mitigation approaches: fencing, planting, dung beetles, and nutrient management. So just briefly to describe that. So we've identified the areas where fencing can provide the greatest impact to enable us to set stock back and plant up significant areas. We've created a subsidy for that. we've identified large areas where we can actually not only regenerate the existing forest, areas that have been cleared previously but are starting to regenerate, but also substitute that with additional planting. And again, we've created a subsidy to incentivize that. And also, this is quite an important one to keep the nutrients out of the waterways. We've identified a biocontrol technique here, which is a dung beetle, and created an environmental pack in order to support landowners to transition into this way of managing their farms. The very last slide I want to mention, which is really important, is this slide here shows people that have able to return to this place, which is so significant to them as Indigenous people. The government has created quite a remarkable package, which we call Jobs in Nature, that has enabled people to be employed back at place. This is a large-scale restoration project that they are leading themselves, as well as a nursery that will deliver the necessary stock for planting up the wider catchment over the period of the next 4 to 10 years. So that's a quick summary. Back to you. Thanks, Ken. Kia ora.
Thanks, Martin. Some really beautiful images, and looks like a great place to be working, and really inspiring work that you're doing down there in New Zealand. For our next speaker, we will have the Principal Environment Officer for the Ministry of Environment in Fiji, Ms. Srinivasa Mwangai Ramasi. Srinivasa, are you with us?
Good afternoon, Ken. Yes, certainly, I'm with you.
Great. We can hear you very clearly. Do you have a presentation to share?
No, I'm sorry. I just got speaking points that I can speak through this evening. Thank you.
Okay, all good. That'll be great. Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Ken, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It's a pleasure to join you all virtually today from the Western Division on behalf of the Director of Environment, who's unable to join us at this hour due to other work commitment at this time. I'm here to speak on the nature-based solution from what we understand from the ministry's perspective. And for the Fiji's Ministry of Environment, we have actively promoted the use of green infrastructure solution to mitigate the climate change impacts. And it does this through its regulatory role in its enforcement of its Fiji's Environment Management Act 2005 and the Environment Management EIA Process Regulations of 2007. And of course, through the implementation of programs and projects that basically adopts the nature-based solution concept. What the Ministry of Environment understands about the nature-based solution is that it basically refers to the sustainable management and use of nature for tackling various socio-environmental challenges that we come across. We also know for a fact that it also means the reliance on the capital that nature has to offer, such as our forests, our mangroves, our seagrass beds, and coral ecosystems, to help mitigate against climate change. So for us, NbS, or nature-based solution, can also be described as a form of green infrastructure that predominantly utilizes plants and ecosystem services to perform an engineering function. So to fully understand what the nature-based solution is, we first had to understand the difference between a green infrastructure from a green infrastructure. Green infrastructure, it basically is a loose term used to describe engineering projects that uses man-made materials such as concrete and steels, while the green infrastructure is again a loose term used to describe engineering projects that utilizes predominantly plants and ecosystem services to perform the engineering functions. So, and so we fully understand that the green infrastructure investments are cost-effective ways to achieve climate-resilient infrastructure, and it can be used to support and adapt to climate change and preserve biodiversity for the well-being of our communities at large. So the Department of Environment has supported a number of nature-based solution projects that are implemented through the Ministry of Waterways and Environment. And some examples of these nature-based solution projects include the nature-based hybrid seawall. This is a hybrid seawall that uses a bioengineering system that uses a gray to green infrastructure system, whereby we have mangroves planted as first line defense, and these are followed by large boulders that act as a protective walls, and behind it are the vetiver grass that is used as a third line of defense that helps in the stability of the coasts. This hybrid seawall is basically in high demand, and there's a lot of requests from our local communities, especially those that are vulnerable to coastal bank erosion, or those that have been inundated with flood waters, or those that have been impacted with sea level rise. There's high demand for this type of hybrid seawalls that are nature-based solutions to be constructed in their various community. Other examples of nature-based solution programs or projects that the ministry has engaged in with the Ministry of Environment and Waterways includes the use of vetiver grass technology. This vetiver grass technology is a technology that is designed basically to address issues associated with the direct effects of climate change, to help protect vulnerable riverbanks and avoid the waterways from being engulfed by silt. One thing that we've seen, the beauty part about this use of vetiver grass is that its unique root system that has a deep root and lateral root system that helps aid in soil stability and preventing further erosion, especially preventing sedimentation from reaching our main waterways. So the ministry is one of the ministry known to advocate and implement using the vetiver grass technology in Fiji. Other examples of which the ministry has fully engaged in nature-based solution to mitigate some of the rising concerns related to climate change or generally biodiversity-related concerns. We have implemented what is called the Jobs for Nature rehabilitation program. This is, in short, it is abbreviated as JNR. The Job for Nature Rehabilitation basically is a program in which we've partnered with local communities in Fiji in helping to restore and rehabilitate nature, and at the same time help build the resilience towards climate change. This Jobs for Nature Rehabilitation program, we basically encourage forest planting, mangrove planting, seagrass planting, and various coastal bank protection work in order to mitigate against the impact of climate change, while at the same time helping restore and rehabilitate nature. So we've completed the first phase of this particular Jobs for Nature rehabilitation program. There was again high demand for the implementation of such initiative in partnership with the local community. The Ministry of Environment simply just comes in, provide the financial assistance needed, and the community themselves sustain the project by engaging in rehabilitation, restoration projects that involves nature. So we've completed the first phase of the project. We've also successfully developed a JNR, a Jobs for Nature Rehabilitation policy, which has been passed in cabinet, and now we are looking forward to the second phase of the Jobs for Nature Rehabilitation program. And in conclusion, the ministry fully recognized that the nature-based solution is an effective tool to build back stronger, at the same time promoting green, resilient, and inclusive recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. We also acknowledge that the nature-based approaches helps reduce vulnerabilities to our local communities, especially from climate risks. It also helps enhance livelihoods and promote biodiversity conservation. And as a ministry, we're hopeful that it will actively promote sustainable development combined with nature-based solutions to help mitigate climate change impacts, more specifically in ensuring human well-being and biodiversity benefits are well intact. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Vinaka Vakalevu, Ms. Srinivasa, for that interesting talk. I think you really captured the nature of our presentations this evening, looking at policy uptake and implementation. Your presentation really bridged both, where we saw the policy uptake in Fiji and examples of implementation with the green seawalls and green infrastructure. With that, we've got a few minutes to take a couple of questions. So if there are any questions from our participants, please raise your hand or type it into the chat. If there are no questions, if there are no further questions, then noting that our session is due to conclude at 6:30 Fiji time, which is 4 minutes away, then I would really like to thank all of our speakers for their wonderful, insightful presentations. We heard about policy and blue carbon in Australia, examples of policies and on-the-ground interventions from Dr. Ray. We had examples of policy and activities on the ground working with farmers for biodiversity in New Zealand, and then our policy and local interventions in Fiji. Do we have any questions, team? Nope. So with no questions, Vinaka Vakalevu, thank you everybody for your time and your presentations. For those of you traveling to Egypt, we wish you safe travels and all the best success in the negotiations, and hope you bring back some great results for the region and the planet. Vinaka Vakalevu, and have a good evening, everybody.